Imagine walking down a quiet street on an ordinary afternoon. Traffic hums in the distance. People pass without noticing each other. Nothing feels urgent. Then suddenly, a small hand grabs your sleeve. You look down. A little girl no older than 7 stands there shaking. Tears running down her face. Breath uneven. "They're hurting my mama." 3 words. Soft, but heavy. In moments like that, most people don't think clearly. Adrenaline spikes. Heart rate rises. The world narrows. Now imagine the person she ran to was someone known worldwide. Keanu Reeves. Not on a film set. Not under studio lights. No dramatic soundtrack. Just a street. A child. And pressure. Here's the real question. What do you do when urgency collides with responsibility? Do you rush forward blindly? Do you let emotion take control? Or do you pause, even for a second, to understand what's truly happening? Across the road, voices are raised. A crowd is forming. Phones are already out. In today's world, moments escalate quickly. Not just physically, socially, digitally, emotionally. And in that split second, something interesting happens. He doesn't move fast. He breathes. Slow. Controlled. Intentional. Because strength isn't always about speed. Sometimes it's about clarity. The little girl clutches tighter, expecting immediate action. The crowd expects drama. The internet, if it ever sees this, would expect a headline. But what if the most powerful move isn't a reaction? What if it's composure? In high-pressure situations, reputation disappears. Fame doesn't help. Status means nothing. All that remains is presence. And presence, real presence, can shift an entire situation before a single word is spoken. So the real story isn't about confrontation. It's about what happens in the space between stimulus and response. Because sometimes, the strongest moment is the quiet one no one expects. Before anything dramatic happens, it's important to understand something. This isn't about violence. It's about pressure. Real pressure doesn't always look explosive. It doesn't always involve chaos. Sometimes, it's simply the weight of a moment, when someone looks at you and expects you to fix everything. The little girl is still holding his sleeve. Across the street, voices rise and overlap. Not clear enough to understand. Just sharp enough to signal tension. Crowds form quickly in public situations. But crowds rarely help. They observe. They record. They speculate. And speculation spreads faster than truth. Now think about the man she ran to. Keanu Reeves is known globally for portraying controlled, disciplined characters. In films like John Wick, audiences see precision, focus, and calculated movement. But that's cinema. Choreographed. Rehearsed. Scripted. In interviews, Reeves has spoken about preparation, about training not just physically but mentally, about repetition, about patience, about staying present under simulated pressure. And while this story is fictional, the idea of preparation under stress is very real. Because when pressure rises, people reveal their habits. Some people rush in without assessing. Some freeze. Some escalate. Very few slow down. He kneels slightly to meet the girl at eye level. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Grounded. "What's happening?" he asks calmly. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just enough to create safety. Psychological studies often show that when one person lowers their emotional intensity, it can influence the entire environment. Tone matters. Posture matters. Distance matters. Across the street, the shouting continues. But here's what's interesting. He doesn't charge toward the noise. He observes first. Where are people standing? Is anyone in immediate danger? Is this an argument? A misunderstanding? A moment fueled by emotion? In high-stress environments, rushing can create more harm than help. And in public, escalation spreads like wildfire. The crowd senses something different. There's no dramatic sprint. No aggressive posture. No heroic display. Just steady steps forward. Measured. Intentional. In moments like this, composure becomes contagious. The little girl's breathing begins to slow. Because children mirror the emotional tone of the adults around them. This isn't about dominance. It's about control, internal control. In many interviews over the years, Reeves has emphasized humility and quiet focus. Not intimidation. Not bravado. That reputation, calm, thoughtful, grounded, is part of why fictional scenarios like this resonate. But reputation alone means nothing in a live moment. Only behavior matters. The crowd is waiting for something explosive. But explosive moments often make situations worse. What most people misunderstand is this. Strength is rarely loud at the beginning. It's observant. It's patient. It gathers information before acting. And sometimes the most important decision is deciding not to escalate. Because in public crises, there are always three battles happening at once. The visible one, the emotional one, and the invisible one inside your own mind. And if you can steady the third one, you often influence the first two. So before anything shifts physically, something shifts internally. Breathing slows, focus sharpens, and the real test begins. Not of force, but of discipline. The distance between calm and chaos is only a few steps. He crosses the street, not hurried, not hesitant. Measured. The raised voices become clearer now. Not violent, but sharp. Emotional. Overlapping. Two adults locked in a heated argument. Words flying faster than reason. A circle forming around them. And in today's world, circles don't just watch. They record. Phones are lifted. Whispers spread. Someone mutters, "This is going to blow up online." But here's what most people misunderstand. Escalation doesn't begin with action. It begins with energy. When people feel cornered, they get louder. When they feel watched, they perform. When they feel attacked, they defend. He doesn't step into the center. Not yet. Instead, he positions himself just outside the emotional radius, close enough to influence, far enough not to provoke. Body language speaks before words do. Shoulders relaxed. Hands visible. Posture open. No clenched fists. No sudden movements. The little girl stands slightly behind him now. Safer. Because presence, when grounded, creates space. Across from him, tension flickers. One person gestures sharply. The other steps forward defensively. The crowd tightens. This is the moment most people rush in. But rushing often adds fuel. He watches the rhythm of the interaction. Who is reacting? Who is escalating? Who is simply overwhelmed? There's a difference. And recognizing it requires composure. In high-pressure training for films like John Wick, actors rehearse choreography repeatedly, not just to move quickly but to move precisely. Precision is controlled timing. And timing is everything. He steps forward now, but not between them. Beside them. Angle, not confrontation. That subtle shift changes the geometry of the space. Instead of facing opposition, they now face awareness. His voice is calm. Let's slow this down. Not shouted. Not commanding. But firm enough to interrupt the rhythm. Interrupting rhythm breaks escalation. The crowd quiets slightly, confused. They expected something louder. More dramatic. Instead they see stillness. And stillness under pressure feels powerful. One of the adults turns toward him, frustrated, defensive. This doesn't concern you. And that's the moment tension spikes. Because ego is fragile when exposed publicly. But ego feeds on resistance. He doesn't resist. He acknowledges. I understand. I'm not here to argue. I just want to make sure everyone's safe. Safety. That word shifts the focus. Not blame. Not dominance. Not control. Safety. The energy lowers just slightly. And sometimes slightly is enough. The second adult steps back half a pace. Breathing hard. But no longer advancing. The geometry changes again. Distance increases. Volume decreases. The crowd senses it too. What they expected to escalate is stabilizing. And here's where everything quietly shifts. Authority isn't about overpowering someone. It's about regulating yourself so completely that others unconsciously begin to match you. The little girl watches. Her breathing steadier now. Because children read tone before words. No dramatic takedown. No cinematic moment. Just a reset. And that reset spreads. The argument doesn't disappear instantly. But it loses its edge. Because someone introduced calm into the system. And calm, when sustained, disrupts chaos. In that moment it becomes clear. The real confrontation was never physical. It was emotional. And the person who controls the emotional temperature controls the outcome. Not through force, but through presence. There's a moment in every tense situation where it can go either way. Forward, into chaos. Or downward, into calm. Most people don't notice that moment. They're too busy reacting. But reaction is fast. Control is deliberate. The voices are no longer sharp, just strained. Breathing heavy. Pride still involved. He doesn't lecture. He doesn't accuse. He simply adjusts his position again. Not stepping between them as a barrier. But slightly offset. Changing angles. It's subtle. Yet powerful. Because confrontation thrives on direct opposition. Face to face, chest to chest. Change the angle. and you change the psychology. One of the adults looks ready to speak again, louder this time. But before the volume rises, he does something unexpected. He lowers his own voice. Not to whisper. Just enough that others must quiet down to hear. Human instinct is fascinating. When someone speaks softly in tension, people lean in. Noise decreases. Attention shifts. And just like that, the emotional temperature drops another degree. I think everyone here wants this to end well, he says calmly. No threats. No dramatic tone. Just assumption of goodwill. And that assumption forces a pause. Because when you treat people like they are reasonable, they often try to become reasonable. The crowd is quieter now. Phones still raised. But anticipation has changed. They were waiting for explosion. Instead, they're witnessing regulation. One of the adults exhales sharply. Not surrender. Release. There's a difference. Release means the nervous system is starting to settle. And when the nervous system settles, thinking returns. He gestures gently toward the side. Open palm, no pointing. Let's take a breath. Step over here. It's an invitation, not an order. Choice reduces defensiveness. The two adults hesitate. Then one steps back. Half a step. Small movements matter. That half step widens space. Space reduces threat. Threat reduction lowers aggression. This is the real shift. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. But powerful. The little girl is no longer crying. She's watching. Confused at first, maybe expecting shouting to continue. But instead she sees something rare. An adult who isn't trying to win. Just stabilize. Across the street someone mutters, "That was intense." But intensity is fading. Because emotional energy requires fuel. And no one is feeding it anymore. He keeps his breathing steady. Slow inhale. Long exhale. Breathing patterns are contagious. When one person regulates, others unconsciously mirror. It's biology. The argument turns into conversation. Still tense. But controlled. Volume drops from shouting to speaking. Gestures soften from sharp to restrained. And here's the truth most people miss. De-escalation isn't weakness. It's skill. It requires more awareness than aggression ever could. Aggression is instinctive. Regulation is trained. In interviews over the years, Keanu Reeves has often emphasized humility and focus, not dominance. While this scenario is fictional, the idea behind it isn't. Preparation isn't just physical. It's emotional. The crowd begins to disperse. Not because something dramatic happened, but because nothing dramatic happened. And that's the surprise. No takedown. No heroic display. No viral confrontation clip. Just a reset. The two adults now stand apart, breathing normally. One nods slightly. The other looks down. Not defeated. Just aware. The moment that could have spiraled has stabilized. And stability feels almost anticlimactic. But that's because we're conditioned to expect spectacle. Quiet resolution rarely trends. Yet it changes lives more often than spectacle ever does. He kneels again beside the little girl. "It's okay," he says softly. Not as a promise that everything is perfect, but as reassurance that chaos doesn't always win. And in that simple act, lowering himself to her level, there's another subtle message. Power doesn't need height. It needs steadiness. The street begins to sound normal again. Traffic hums. Footsteps move. Conversations resume. If someone uploads a clip later, viewers might say, "That wasn't dramatic." And that's exactly the point. Because sometimes the most powerful shift is the one that prevents something worse from happening. Not loud. Not viral. Just controlled. And control in moments like this is the real turning point. Later that evening, imagine a short clip surfaces online. 10 seconds. No context. Just raised voices. Crowd. And a familiar face stepping into frame. Within minutes, the comments begin. Who won? Did he step in? Was there a fight? Because that's how the internet works. It compresses complexity into conflict. It reduces human emotion into scoreboards. But that question, who won, completely misses what actually happened. There was no opponent. There was no contest. There was only a moment that could have escalated, and didn't. Yet online culture often rewards spectacle over restraint. If someone shouts louder, they trend. If someone reacts dramatically, they go viral. If someone dominates, they become a headline. Quiet control rarely gets attention. And that's the irony. Because in real life, the person who stabilizes the room is often the most influential person there. Imagine scrolling through the comments. He should have done more. Why didn't he step between them? That didn't look heroic. But heroism isn't always visible. Sometimes it's preventing something from becoming worse. The camera angle wouldn't show the slowed breathing. It wouldn't show the subtle shift in posture. It wouldn't capture the decision to lower a voice instead of raising it. The internet sees outcomes. It rarely sees discipline. And that disconnect creates a distorted idea of strength. Strength becomes loud. Dominance becomes admirable. Restraint becomes boring. But here's what's interesting. In interviews over the years, Keanu Reeves has often spoken about humility, about not chasing noise, about staying grounded despite attention. That quiet demeanor is part of why fictional scenarios like this resonate so deeply. Because people sense the contrast. On screen, in films like John Wick, audiences cheer when tension explodes into choreographed action. But in real life, the goal is the opposite. Real maturity is reducing harm. Real authority is preventing escalation. And that doesn't always look impressive on a screen. Let's be honest. If this moment had turned chaotic, if someone had pushed, shouted louder, or created a spectacle, the clip would spread faster. News outlets might frame it dramatically. Commentators would debate it. Panels would analyze it. But because it ended quietly, it fades. And that says something important about modern attention. We're conditioned to react to spikes, to noise, to visible conflict. So when we see composure, we underestimate it. Online, someone might slow the clip down, zoom in, analyze body language, speculate. But speculation is easy when you're not inside the moment. Inside the moment, there's no rewind button, no comment section, no second take. There's only choice. React or respond. That's the real story. Not whether someone won, but whether someone controlled themselves when it mattered. And maybe that's why this fictional scenario lingers. Because deep down, most people know the truth. It's harder to regulate yourself than to overpower someone else. It's harder to lower your voice than to raise it. It's harder to step aside than to step forward aggressively. The internet rarely celebrates that difficulty. But in real life, that difficulty defines character. If you ask the little girl what she remembers, it wouldn't be dominance. It would be safety. If you ask the crowd what surprised them, it wouldn't be force. It would be calm. And if you stripped away the online commentary, the only thing that truly shifted that afternoon was emotional temperature. From heated to steady. From reactive to controlled. And maybe the real misunderstanding online is believing strength must be visible to be real. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is prevent a moment from becoming worse. No applause. No trending hashtag. No dramatic music. Just a quiet decision to stabilize. And in a world addicted to escalation, that might be the rarest strength of all. Now the street is quiet again. No shouting. No crowd forming. No phones raised. If you arrived 10 minutes later, you'd never know anything had happened. And that's the part most people overlook. Because we're trained to notice explosions. Not prevention. But let's slow this down. Forget the crowd. Forget the online commentary. Forget even the familiar face in the middle of the moment. What actually mattered here? A choice. Pause. A refusal to escalate. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't announce itself. Real strength is internal regulation when external pressure rises. Think about your own life for a moment. Not a dramatic street scene. Just everyday tension. A disagreement at work. A misunderstanding at home. A sharp comment that hits harder than it should. What's your first instinct? To defend? To interrupt? To prove your point? Most people operate on impulse. Impulse feels powerful. But impulse is reactive. Response is deliberate. In high-pressure training environments, whether for film roles like John Wick or for public speaking or negotiation, professionals rehearse one thing repeatedly. Control your breathing. Control your posture. Control your tone. Because physiology drives psychology. If your breathing is fast, your mind follows. If your posture is tense, your thoughts tighten. If your tone rises, the room rises with it. But if you slow down, the room often follows that too. This fictional scenario isn't about celebrity. It's about discipline. And discipline isn't dramatic. It's repetitive. It's built quietly over time. That's something often associated with figures like Keanu Reeves. A reputation for preparation, humility, and measured presence. Not because of myth, but because consistency creates perception. And consistency comes from habits. So here's the real question. When pressure finds you, and it will, what habits surface? Do you raise your voice? Or lower it? Do you step forward aggressively? Or create space? Do you aim to win? Or to resolve? The world often rewards dominance publicly. But privately, dominance damages relationships. Control preserves them. There's a reason calm leadership feels reassuring. It signals safety. And humans are wired to seek safety first. The little girl in this story didn't need someone to dominate. She needed someone steady. Someone whose presence felt grounded. Someone who didn't add chaos to chaos. And that's the deeper layer here. We often think courage looks like bold action. But sometimes courage looks like restraint. Restraint requires confidence. Because when you don't react loudly, you risk being misunderstood. You risk appearing passive. You risk not getting applause. But maturity doesn't chase applause. It prioritizes outcome. Let's make this personal. When was the last time you chose silence instead of argument? When was the last time you took a breath before replying to a message that triggered you? When was the last time you stepped back instead of stepping into conflict? Those small decisions rarely trend. But they shape your life more than dramatic moments ever will. And here's something powerful. Calm is contagious. Neurologically, humans mirror the emotional states of those around them. If one person escalates, others follow. If one person regulates, others settle. That's influence. Not loud influence. Quiet influence. And quiet influence lasts longer. So maybe the real lesson isn't about a street. Or a crowd. Or even the familiar face at the center of this fictional scene. Maybe it's about this. You don't control the chaos that approaches you. But you control your contribution to it. You don't control whether tension appears. But you control whether you amplify it. And in a world constantly pulling people toward reaction, social media, headlines, instant opinions, choosing deliberation is radical. Strength isn't explosive. It's stable. Confidence isn't aggressive. It's measured. And discipline doesn't need validation. It needs consistency. So the next time pressure rises in your life, and it will, remember this moment. Not for what happened, but for what didn't happen. Because sometimes the most powerful story is the one where escalation was possible. And composure chose otherwise. By the end of the day, the street looked exactly the same. Cars passed. Shops closed. Streetlights flickered on. Nothing about the pavement suggested that tension had ever stood there. And maybe that's the most powerful part of the story. Because the strongest moments in life rarely leave visible marks. There was no dramatic finish. No applause. No viral headline declaring a hero. Just a quiet reset. And resets don't trend. But they transform. If someone later asked, what happened? The answer would sound almost underwhelming. There was an argument. It calmed down. That's it. No spectacle. No domination. Just de-escalation. And yet, within that simplicity, there's something profound. We've been conditioned to believe that strength must be proven. That power must be displayed. That authority must be asserted. But what if the highest form of strength is not needing to prove anything at all? In films like John Wick, audiences witness stylized precision and choreographed tension. Action has rhythm. Confrontation has design. Conflict has payoff. But real life isn't edited. Real life rewards something different. Restraint, clarity, timing, and presence. Over the years, Keanu Reeves has built a reputation, not just for roles, but for quiet humility. Stories circulate about kindness, patience, generosity. Whether large or small, they all point to one trait: composure. And composure is magnetic. Not because it dominates a room, but because it stabilizes one. Think about the strongest person you've ever met. Was it the loudest? The most intimidating? Or was it the one who stayed steady when everyone else reacted? True influence doesn't shout. It regulates. It absorbs tension without multiplying it. It chooses outcome over ego. In the fictional moment we imagined, there were multiple ways the situation could have unfolded. Escalation was possible. Drama was possible. A scene was possible. But instead, what unfolded was something far rarer. Control without spectacle. And maybe that's why this perspective feels different. Because it challenges the narrative we're used to. The narrative that says, stand your ground aggressively. Show them who's in charge. Never back down. But maturity reframes that. Sometimes standing your ground means lowering your voice. Sometimes showing control means stepping sideways instead of forward. Sometimes not backing down means not reacting at all. The little girl in that moment didn't need a performance. She needed reassurance. The crowd didn't need dominance. They needed stabilization. And the adults involved didn't need to lose. They needed space to cool down. That's leadership. Leadership doesn't always hold a title. It holds responsibility. Responsibility for the emotional temperature of the room. Responsibility for not feeding chaos. Responsibility for modeling restraint. Here's the quiet truth. Anyone can escalate. It requires no training, no preparation, no discipline. But de-escalation? That requires self-awareness. It requires emotional regulation. It requires the ability to separate ego from outcome. And that's difficult. Very difficult. Because when tension rises, your nervous system urges you to react, to defend, to assert, to protect your pride. Choosing calm in that moment isn't weakness. It's mastery. Mastery over yourself. And self-mastery is the rarest kind of strength. Maybe that's why stories inspired by composed public figures resonate. Not because of myth, not because of action, but because people are hungry for examples of restraint. In a world that rewards outrage, in a culture that monetizes conflict, in feeds that amplify extremes, calm feels almost revolutionary. So here's the takeaway. Maybe the strongest person in the room isn't the one who wins. Maybe it's the one who prevents someone else from losing control. Maybe real dominance is dominating your own impulses. Maybe authority is emotional steadiness under pressure. And maybe power isn't loud at all. It's consistent. It's patient. It's deliberate. If this fictional scenario felt impactful, it's not because of what happened. It's because of what could have happened and didn't. That space between possibility and action is where character lives. And character is built in those quiet decisions. No one applauds. So the next time life hands you a tense moment, a sharp comment, a heated disagreement, a rising conflict, pause, breathe. Lower your voice instead of raising it. Create space instead of closing distance. Choose resolution over reaction. Because maybe the strongest move you'll ever make won't look dramatic. It won't trend. It won't go viral. But it will shift the room. And sometimes, that's more powerful than winning. If this perspective changed how you define strength, then you already understand the lesson. And understanding it is the first step toward living it.